they'll have a reasonably clear line of sight on you most of the time, and that is well within their engagement range for their rifles, their machine guns, their RPGs, anything like that. When you're doing your attack runs like the FFAR run we did earlier, you want to pull out at least, no lower than 100 meters. If you can, pull out at 150 meters. This will do a big deal to prevent you from getting hit by those kind of weapon systems. I'm going to go ahead and quote TDP2 here because there's some good sections about the helo stuff. You guys probably should have read this already for this course as preparatory material, but we'll rehash it just so everyone's clear. One of the important aspects of helicopter survivability lies in using the terrain to maximum advantage. Hills, valleys, forests, buildings, those sorts of terrain features can be used to make a helicopter unobservable to enemies, and thus you cannot take fire from them. Attack helo crews, you usually stay low and fast like we said. You move from one covered position to another, and that allows you to avoid enemy anti-aircraft artillery, man-pads, SAMs, etc. When you need to engage your scout, you pop up briefly, scan the area. You don't want to do more than, let's say, 10 to 20 seconds of exposure time, and then you drop back down. So that if they see you, the amount of time it takes them to see you, identify you as a threat, pan over to you, figure out the range, and start engaging you, by that point you'll already be masking again. Now bear in mind that all this differs based on the terrain. If you're in like really heavily wooded, hilly terrain, you can fly higher because the terrain itself and the vegetation will mask a lot of fires without you doing anything. If you're in a big open flat desert area or a semi-open area like this with kind of rolling hills, you'll probably want to stay a lot lower. That's assuming they have a capable anti-air threat in the area. The basic thing to take away is that there's pros and cons of both. High altitude, it tends to reduce your vulnerability to small arms, crew serve weapons, HMG, AT, because people love to take AT shots at helicopters, and so do AI. It gives you better observation. You won't run into stuff in theory unless there's other aircraft there and they're not paying attention. You will typically have a much higher chance of being able to do a successful auto rotation because you'll have, you have more time. You're higher up, you have more time to look around and find a place to land. The higher you are, when we're talking about humans, the harder it is for them to recognize. Basically, they can't focus on the ground fight they're engaged in and the air threat at the same time. So if you get above where they're looking to engage, the ground force, you're basically invisible to them. You can do whatever you want. People just don't look up that often when they're fighting. Higher altitude also facilitates diving attacks and strafing runs. Some of the drawbacks of high altitude: you're more visible if they're looking for you. It's easier for them to hear where you're coming from. And because of your altitude, there's a lot more weapon systems to potentially fire at you at once. And of course, it's much easier for them to engage you with guided missiles. Low altitude, on the other hand, it reduces your visibility to the enemy. If they can't see you, they can't shoot you. You can mask with rain, trees, buildings. It seems, it could be wrong, but it seems like it makes it harder for them to locate where you're coming from just by audio observation. Lower altitude typically makes you less vulnerable to anti-air systems. Even if they do fire, you can just drop behind trees, and there's a good chance a missile will run into those and destroy itself. Now, as to the cons, low altitude has a lot more than high, I believe. You are much more vulnerable to anything on the ground. Any weapon system on the ground can potentially kill you. If they hit your crew, if they hit the pilot, you're done. It reduces your visibility. The less visibility you have, the less you understand the situation, the less you're able to make good judgment calls on what's happening. It introduces a very significant danger of running into stuff. Terrain, trees, power lines, anything like that. And again, you're less likely to survive an engine failure because of how low you are. If you have an engine failure while you're flying over one of these one of these big patches of trees on cell, you can't really do anything there. You're just kind of screwed. Lower altitude also reduces the effectiveness of some of your attack profiles. The diving attacks and strafing runs are not as effective for reasons of like the beaten zone we talked about earlier. Does anyone have any questions about the speed or altitude at this point?
I got a question.
Go ahead.
Is there any kind of echo modeling at low altitude in armor?
No, not that I've ever noticed.
I mean, would that, or some kind of, because you mentioned that's harder to locate, would that be part of it?
No, I believe what happens is it'll just muffle the sound. And especially if there's a fight raging, you muffle your sound by so many decibels, it'll be that much harder than to even notice you're there. Whereas if you flew up in the air, you'd be a louder sound, and they'd pick you up sooner.
Follow-up question to that is, I haven't seen it, but are there any kind of silencer, rotor type, I don't know what they're called, but you know those choppers you see in movies that are really silent. Is that possible in armor?
Well, that's kind of like a sound mod type thing. I don't think that really comes into play here. Helicopters in this don't sound like they do. Like, in reality, there's all kinds of dynamics about how the wind's moving, where they're coming from, all sorts of things. They sound very different. However, Arma 3, if they include that stealth Black Hawk stuff, I wouldn't be surprised if they put something like that in there. It may become relevant. It isn't now. Also, you guys in smoke grenades, good God.
Again?
Gotta smoke them.
Okay, range. As we saw earlier with our weapon systems and the lasing and all that stuff, we can hit things much further than they can hit you, with the exception of, missiles. Use that to your advantage. Don't get in a rush. Don't force yourself to fly right up to something to engage it. You can stand off from them. We have now a 5-kilometer view distance. It's not, if we're ever playing a mission and this isn't enough for you, 5 kilometers isn't enough, or whatever, just ask. We'll boost it up. It's, you can make a realism argument for that, I guess. But anyway, the point is, make use of your range. You can reach out and touch them from much further than they can you, especially if you're fighting infantry. They're just fucked, unless they have trellis. They're still pretty fucked then. Now, with that being said, urgency may not permit you to do that. Sometimes you have to get in there real close because stuff's just going crazy and you don't have time to extend out far. Situation dictates, adapt to whatever's happening. When you're getting closer to them like that, that's where you, as a gunner, and you as a pilot, having high proficiency with your weapon systems, allows you to make the most of a short window of opportunity. If you're getting really close to someone and you can rip off your rockets and guns and missiles real fast and get out of there, that's great. If you're getting real close to them and you're slow about that, the longer you're in that engagement area, the more likely you're going to get hit. So that should be your motivating factor for learning how to employ these weapons as fast as possible. I'll cover the threats again so we're all very clear on this. The types of threats, you have heavy machine guns. These can be static mounted or they can be vehicle mounted. Heavy machine guns will fuck you up. If they hit your engine, they can knock it out very easily. Heavy machine guns, typically, you will see them indicated by a tracer, a stream of tracers. Identify that, communicate that to your gunner, do an orbit over it, and you should be able to take it out relatively easily. When you're fighting something like that, anything tracer-based that's trying to track you from a long range, there's a lot of maneuvers you can do to set that, to prevent that from hitting you. Change your speed, change your altitude, change your heading. Do it in short intervals, like maybe every 2-3 seconds you're changing some aspect of that. Then it's only luck that's going to allow them to hit you. Also, cannons fall in that category. Cannons are basically as dangerous, if not a little bit more so, as heavy machine guns. A few hits from those will knock out your systems. We also have medium machine guns. You often can't tell the difference between those and heavy machine guns. Treat them the same. Just hit them with your cannon. That's what it's there for. Any kind of anti-aircraft artillery, Shilkas, Tunguskas, stuff like that, most of those you'll see a radar warning receiver. It shouldn't be a surprise that they're in the area. So when you see it, react appropriately. Missiles we went over earlier, you won't know if an IR missile's fired at you. You will know if a radar one is. So radar, get down behind something. IR, do the same thing, break, get down behind something, and pop flares at the same time. Last one's RPGs. RPGs in ACE, for whatever reason, airburst. They can airburst all day long behind you and around you and not do anything. When they get really close, that's when it starts to matter. If they get a direct hit, that will drop you out of the sky almost immediately. RPGs will not hit you if you stay fast. And you stay fast, you can stay at low or high altitude, but typically you want to stay higher, like we said earlier. Just don't slow down. If you slow down, you get hit. That happened to me recently in one of these cell missions, where at the end of it, we hadn't been engaged by RPGs for a long time. I got complacent. Complacency kills. We slowed down to facilitate a gunshot, and right then, RPG came out of nowhere, knocked me out. Aircraft went down. Crew was dead. They lost support right there. So learn from that kind of mistake. Don't make it yourself. It's really tempting, but you have to stay fast.